Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with KC-based jazz baritone saxophonist B.J. Jansen. He opened up about his newest 2019 CD called Tradition. He was born in Cincinnati, and there he established himself as a charismatic and dynamic performer, composer, bandleader, and educator on and off the stage. It all began at 10 when his father bought him an alto sax and gave him records of Gerry, Mulligan, and Charlie Parker. His musical journey took him from the Midwest to the East Coast, where he relocated to Philadelphia in 2004. He spent 3 years learning on the streets of Philadelphia before going to New York City in 2007, and now he is calling Kansas City home and getting involved in a very fruitful scene. So please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends. First and foremost, BJ, thanks for taking some time out, and welcome to Kansas City.
Oh, thank you. I really love Kansas City. I love the jazz history. I love the arts, and all the quality of the scene is so high here, and really glad to be here. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. You got a new album coming out. Talk to me about this project.
So Tradition is an EP. We just going to be releasing that. The street date is actually September 5th. So kind of the background around how that came about was basically I wanted to do a recording that was very kind of loose, very improvised in the studio. And so I booked some studio time in North Jersey near New York, and I grabbed some of my friends, Desron Douglas, Wayne Smith, and George Burton, some fabulous rhythm players, all in my generation. And we basically went in and just called tunes, and with the tradition in mind, came up with some unique on-the-spot arrangements of those tunes. Nothing was rehearsed before. Nothing was, really too much thought out. It was really just in the moment and capturing in the moment, and sort of as a live jazz experiment.
Right on. So speaking of, new things and beginnings and comfortable places, talk to me about growing up in Cincinnati, how you got into jazz, kind of about your childhood a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was about 10 years old, my father bought me an alto sax and got me started in music. He was a saxophone player in elementary, middle school, and high school. Also played the guitar and managed some bands in the early 70s in Cincinnati. So he was familiar with jazz and is a big music fan. And that's really where it all started. He also bought some tapes of Charlie Parker, hence the connection here to Kansas City, and, also Gerry Mulligan. And it all really started from there. Growing up, I had not really known what jazz was except for what was on those tapes. I really thought all of that was written out because that's really about the depth of my understanding of music at that point, until I was about in 7th or 8th grade, and then I started experimenting with, improvisation, blues, things like that, the Abersalts, and then I started getting more and more into it as a teenager in high school, and developed through that. By the time I was 16, I had probably led my first gigs in the Cincinnati area, mostly around the school and some talent shows and things like that. And then some fond memories of going out to jazz clubs in Cincinnati like the Blue Wisps, which isn't unfortunately around anymore, but going and checking that out when I got my driver's license. And, then I decided that I wanted to play the music. And from there, I ended up going to University of U of L in Louisville, Gene Abersalt's program. And I went there and graduated from there. And I moved to Philadelphia. And then in Philadelphia, I would say I had got my master's degree from the streets of music. The tradition is very deep there. And that's actually where I met both Wayne Smith on the recording, the drummer, and also George Burden I met when I was in Philadelphia. From there, part of the reason I was attracted to Philadelphia was all the great tradition. And, one of my big heroes, John Coltrane, was from there and spent a lot of time developmentally there. So I really wanted to get a understanding of what that is, what's the vibe of that city. So then from there I decided to go to William Patterson in North Jersey, and that's about 25 minutes, 30 minutes from Manhattan. So from there I moved to New York, and then I would say New York was kind of like the PhD of music on the streets there, the music of learning jazz. And, life has brought me back to the Midwest. And, I'm kind of happy that it has. New York is awesome. But I would imagine that some parts of being in a city like Kansas City are even more awesome. So I'm really happy to be able to come back this way, back to the Midwest, and be able to be in a city with a jazz scene at the caliber that Kansas City has and the history. It really reminds me a lot of when I was in Philadelphia.
So the one thing, going to Philadelphia, you're taking a risk, you're moving there, and you're wanting to kind of go after, the heroes that inspired you. Did you get out of Philadelphia what you wanted?
Absolutely. I mean, Philadelphia, the tradition is rich as it is here in Kansas City. A lot of relatives and a lot of the older musicians, the relatives and the teachers and remnants of that original scene were still in Philadelphia. So, there was a place called Ortlieb's Jazz House that was really instrumental. That's where I met actually both Wayne and George, and it was kind of a mecca. It was one of the few sessions that had real mentors and real seasoned great musicians that were actually leading the session. So there would be maybe Sid Simmons would be playing piano, and Mike Boone and Mickey Roker would be there playing, and I met Cecil Payne there. I mean, it was just so many folks, Tim Warfield, some really great younger musicians and older musicians. And one of the things that I really loved was the crossing of the generations in that scene and around that particular scene of that club. Made it really super beneficial and sort of old school in the learning, because you really were learning at the session. So it was super educational. I got to meet and just talk and chat with folks whose cousin, knew Coltrane or, knew Lee Morgan or, things like that. So it was just great getting to know the history as well as the technical aspects of the music from an artistic standpoint.
So when you get to New York, that's obviously the mecca of jazz in the world. Did you dive in fast? Who were some of the early gigs you were with, and just kind of how all that evolved for you?
So New York was interesting coming from Philadelphia, because the scene in Philadelphia is so strong, and a lot of the musicians still were coming out of Philadelphia. So there really still is a Philadelphia connection, and it was truly like a brotherhood. And I would say that, a lot of my first gigs or folks that I played with, a lot of it was in Harlem. So there was St. Nick's Pub that no longer is around, and they had a great session. It was on 147th and St. Nicholas Avenue, way uptown in Harlem. And it was very old school, everything from tap dancers poets to straight ahead jazz to free jazz to bebop to everything. I mean, R&B, reggae, any type of music. It was really open and really loose. And there was a leader there. There's a leader that was leading at TC the Third. Now, his mother is Trudy Pitts, and father's Mr. C. So there's a Philly connection right there, but I had never met him till I came to Harlem. Same with like Dwayne Eubanks. I started playing with Dwayne and, having him out to a lot of in my band and everything, but that connection was actually made in New York because we were both in New York. However, we both had a similar experience coming out of Philadelphia. So that's kind of how that evolved, a lot of stuff uptown. Minton's, when they had the session, that was another great opportunity. Just New York's crazy because you just never know who's going to show up. So it could be anybody, whether it's a famous actor or musician or, and then from there, I started playing, like the Fat Cat sessions and some time at Smalls, and then there was a place called The Garage that I had like an 18 months every week, and some of these gigs I actually got before I even came to New York. So I was actually playing them when I was in Philadelphia. So the transition was I guess as smooth as it could be, but it was probably because of the close proximity and the amount of heavy musicians from Philadelphia that I already made contact with before I got to New York.
You've had a long relationship with the Artist Recording Collective with Mr. Christopher Burnett since 2010. Talk to me about that association and kind of that link to Kansas City that's been around for a while.
Chris and I had been connected online for years, and I had a passion around the music industry, and what can we learn and what can we bring from new models to represent and help what's going on in the jazz scene, and ensure the legacy of the music, and also more importantly, what new avenues can we use to get the youth interested in the music. So we sort of had been following each other online, and I found out about the label, and he had asked me if I would like to release something on there. I already had some releases out, and that's really where it started, was sort of that organically through the internet. And at the same time also I was doing an MBA at William Patterson with a concentration in music industry. So it was entertainment industry, music industry, but it's also an MBA, a Master's of Business Administration. So that was another new thing that was happening when I came out to finally made the move to North in around 2007 to the New York area. Then shortly after that, that's when him and I connected, and we started releasing, I believe the first one was She Do What She Do, and then it was Ronan, and then She Do What She Do, which was also with TC the Third, who I spoke about earlier. So that's kind of how it went, and then, later on I find that I'm going to be relocating to Kansas City, and it was a perfect fit.
Now, in your estimation, from Cincinnati to Philadelphia to New York and back here to Kansas City, in your estimation with what you've seen in kind of the evolution of jazz over time, how's jazz doing in 2019?
I think jazz it's in an interesting and transitional place, although jazz is always in transition. What I will say is a lot of the old, or what I'll say, outside of academia, there's a lot of that still around where it always was, and I'm glad to see that, because I think with any type of art form, you have to be careful. You have to be careful that you don't over sanitize something or over institutionalize something, I guess. So I think we are in a healthy space. But what I like about particularly like Kansas City is there's a lot of venues for folks to play outside of an institutional environment or outside of a concert hall environment, because the music was born in the streets and inspired by that. It was born from that experience. And I think one of the things that maybe is a gap is, you know, it's one thing that we can teach technique, how to play an instrument, we can teach pedagogy, we can teach history, but we can't teach experience, and you can't teach creativity necessarily. You can foster it, right? So it's sort of a duality, but everything in life is a duality, and that's a very loaded question with hopefully somewhat coherent answer, I guess.
No, that's good. That's definitely good. So let's kind of hone in on Kansas City here. What are you hoping to get from your time here, and what do you want to see happen?
Wow, so that's a loaded question too. You know, honestly, what I hope to happen is I just want to be a part of the scene, and I want to learn. There's so much here and so much history to learn. I remember when I first came out here, it was right around the Charlie Parker Festival, and Chris, you know, sent me an invite to come out, and I got to meet some folks, and you know, and I also took the tour, the history tour, and got to go to, like, you know, Count Basie's house and all of the highlights right there on 18 and Vine, and it was just amazing. And really that's what I hope to do, is to experience it. And when I've been out in the clubs, I hear a Kansas City swing or a Kansas City flavor that is there, even in the young musicians, and it's really inspiring. You don't get that everywhere. Now, New York has a flavor, and Philly has a flavor, but a lot of places don't have that, and Kansas City does have that. So I'm really interested in honing in on that and adding that to my toolbox.
So you have dedicated your life to jazz. You clearly love it. So tell me, why do you love jazz?
Well, I think there's not anything more patriotic or American than jazz. It's democratic. It's about individuality, and it's also about individuality within a format of expression, and it's really amazing. For me, there's just nothing else when I'm on stage and interacting and having that type of conversation musically that can replace it. I caught the bug early when I was first getting into improvisation, and there's just something that's very satisfying about that. And it's something that never ends. I mean, every day is a challenge, whether it's, you know, trying to just play better than you did yesterday. I mean, it's like you can never master it. It's just an ongoing journey, and it's so rich with history and culture and everything. It's nonstop. It's really a lifestyle.
So early on in your life, what was one of the first jazz shows you ever saw that left a real deep impression on you?
There wasn't one per se, but I do remember experiences, and, you know, being in Kentucky early on, really getting into this. I mean, when I was still in high school, I didn't really know what I didn't know. When I started to really, my freshman year of college, really start to really understand what was out there. But I think one of the things that opened me to that was even just experiencing a lot of this music through recording and just learning from some other musicians in Louisville, you know, like, and then trying to imitate that, like just going into a practice room and trying to imitate it. I can't really point to one exact pivotal moment early on, but it was just the holistic experience of everything. It was like just getting caught up in it.
If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and catch a show anywhere, any place, where are you going?
Let me see here. Wow, that's another hard one because there's so much I would love to check out. But I really think one of the things that I would like to specifically would have loved to be a part of would be, maybe two things. So one would be being able to be at Minton's when Bird was there and Monk, and just checking that out. The birthplace of bebop when it was happening in New York, and really just being on the scene for that. The other one would be being able to be, now I've been to the Village Vanguard many times, but being able to be in the audience when Coltrane first started, his debuts, and there's many recordings of him at the Village Vanguard, and that's very experiential, but I think nothing can replace, you've been to the Village Vanguard, it has a certain sound, but being in the audience for something like that, really experiencing what that was like in the time that it was happening.
So everything's going to come down to this. I got one final question. Everyone has a version or an interpretation of you, your family, your friends, colleagues, but you know yourself best. Who do you think you are?
So let me understand. So you said, who do I think I am?
Yeah.
I never settle, and I'm always trying to learn. The other way I think people would see me is I'm very determined. I've seen a lot of musicians with, I would say, much more talent than I have, naturally, come and go into the wayside, have not developed any type of career at all, or, and it was just, they just didn't want it. So one thing I will say is I've seen a lot of musicians that maybe didn't start out, weren't maybe the picks, right, when they were really young, or they got a late start or something like this. Maybe they're not the supernaturally talented. Coltrane comes to mind with this one. But through just sheer determination and want of doing it and just putting the time in, they were able to create something and move the needle on things that nobody else could. So I think determination, wanting to constantly learn and be better than what I was yesterday, and just not settling. Those would be like my top three.
Right on. That's great. That's a great way to wrap everything up. Hey, welcome again to Kansas City, man. Have a great go, and I can't wait to see you live.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Philadelphia, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to BJ for his time, honesty, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.